Chris Speaks here tonight, back with Dr. Lucas Wilder. Been a while since we chatted, so look forward to getting that started back again. Been a few months there. Lucas, how are you, man?
I'm doing great, Chris. I'm sorry it took us so long to get back together. This has been a rough couple of months trying to get all this new stuff figured out with a few changes in work, and I got a bunch of videos coming out, and so it's been a hectic couple of months.
Well, good. I look forward to those videos. I always they're everyone you do is a treat to watch. I think I've watched just about all of them. Tried to, but glad to hear that. What's anything special coming out?
Yeah, I'm finishing
series.
Fredericksburg.
Do what now?
Yeah, the animated battle maps for Fredericksburg are getting ready to. I'm going to finish them up in the next 4 weeks. It should be finished, and I'll put them all together into one long animated battle map. And then I'm just working on the a very large project, which is going to be. I'm going to take you through animated form from Second Bull Run all the way up until the end of Fredericksburg. So that's going to be quite a few months journey, about basically the last 6 months of the Civil War of 1862.
Okay, so that is a project to undertake.
Yeah, that's a big project. Most of them are already done, but I'm just going to link them together to form one big animated battle map, and I'm really excited about that because eventually I will do the entire Civil War, but this will be, Army of Northern Virginia, Army of the Potomac animated battle map for at least 6 months of the war.
So you're eventually going to have the entire Civil War on an animated battle map?
I will. Eventually, I will.
Okay. That's going to be that would be something. How long do you think that'll take?
Oh gosh, that's going to take years, but I'm cranking away at all the campaigns. Probably the next big project I'm working on will be in May, and that's going to be the entire Stonewalls Valley campaign of '62.
Okay, great. Because somebody was asked about that a while back, and I said I would ask if you had anything on that. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, I'm extremely excited to do that.
Yeah, that was one of my one of my favorite areas there. I had a book, I think it was called something about never were there soldiers as fine as these, and it was basically studied or basically covered the entire first 2 years of the war with Jackson. Yeah. Tonight we're going to talk
mythic proportions. Yeah, you're right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's taken on mythic proportions, and people absolutely love hearing about the Valley campaign. And I thought that'd be a perfect thing for me to do is to animate the entire campaign from the time he gets into the Valley until he leaves the Valley, going to help Robert E. Lee at the 7 Days Battle.
I'll look forward to that. That'll be a really good one. Yeah, that'll be a great one, man. Speaking of Valley campaigns, so we're going to do one of my favorite ones tonight. One with Jubal and his raid. So, tell us about the military situation leading up to this? What's going on with the two armies?
Well, the two armies are basically deadlocked at Richmond. Robert E. Lee has finally been pushed all the way back to Richmond by Ulysses S. Grant after they fought some hard battles, including the battles of the Wilderness, Cold Harbor. Grant finally pushes Robert E. Lee up to Richmond, and now it's a stalemate. And what we're also looking at that same thing happening in the West. Sherman's slowly pushing the Army of Tennessee back towards Atlanta. And well, we know Atlanta falls in September of '64, but Richmond will not fall until April of the next year. So Robert E. Lee is intending to try to find a way to relieve the pressure that Grant is putting on Richmond, find some way to dilute Grant's army, take pieces of it away. And so one way he knows how to do that is to threaten another section of the country. And he's going to hopefully threaten Washington, D.C., but at least get the Valley under Confederate control. The Shenandoah Valley, although this is against my actual argument in my dissertation, the Shenandoah Valley does supply a whole lot of wheat and other crops for the Confederate Army. So Robert E. Lee's army subsists on the forage that they can get in many times in Virginia, but it comes from all over the Confederacy. But you have the Shenandoah Valley, you have that section between the North Anna and the Rappahannock River that's wonderful for agriculture. And Robert E. Lee needs those areas, specifically the Shenandoah Valley. Plus, there's lots of good railroads that are coming in and out that are being targeted by Union forces. And so, hopefully, if he can get an army into the valley, he will be able to hold off any threatening of his supply lines, either that's bringing overland, just overland by wagon, or if you're going to be taking it by rail. He needs to secure those locations. And so, this valley campaign starts off as a way to hopefully draw troops away from the Union forces around Richmond and hopefully secure the valley and pester the Union as much as possible.
Okay, so he puts Yulee or Early in charge of basically a corps.
It's a small corps, but yeah, I would consider it somewhat of a corps. By this point in the war, this force would probably actually be just two divisions,
Okay.
barely. I mean, yeah, it's usually one at least three divisions into a corps, but he starts out fairly small with around 5 to 10,000 troops. Or at least the Valley campaign starts out with about 5 to 10,000 troops. By the time Early kind of takes command, he will be in charge of somewhere around 15,000 men, give or take a few
Okay.
thousand, depending on straggling. But it doesn't start with Early at the beginning. We do have to start in May, in the middle of May, 1864, with the Battle of Newmarket, where Jubal Early does not take part in. He's not there yet. But that's the famous battle where the Virginia Military Institute cadets fight the Union forces and are able to defeat Union forces. And the Confederate commander is John C. Breckinridge. The Union commander is David Hunter. David Hunter's kind of poked his head out of West Virginia to try to tackle a few key locations, though that being Stanton, Lexington, and Lynchburg. Lynchburg has a hospital as well as a little bit of manufacturing there, and the railroad that's going to lead from basically the Western Confederacy into the Eastern Confederacies also runs right through Lynchburg. So he needs to capture Lynchburg. The Battle of Newmarket helps to thwart that. David Hunter will push on even though he loses at the Battle of Newmarket, and push towards Lynchburg. That's when Jubal Early finally arrives, and this is in June of 1864.
So he links up and combines these forces.
Yeah, Jubal Early will combine all the forces in the valley. Again, there wasn't many Confederates or at least not a large force in the Valley of Confederates. Once Jubal Early arrives with roughly about 10,000 men, he has somewhere around 15,000 under his command when he enters the valley in about mid-June of 1864. At the Battle of Lynchburg, he's able to kind of thwart David Hunter's plans to destroy the railroad there. And David Hunter goes back into what's now it was back then West Virginia. Sorry, year before West Virginia becomes a state. So it's sometimes hard when you start talking about 62. You have to remember that West Virginia was not a state, and so someone like me talks about Appalachia a lot. And I usually stay within 62, 63. I usually start to refer to it as what would become West Virginia, but it's already been there. But Early takes a very aggressive initiative, and I think Robert E. Lee understands that Jubal Early is the person to kind of take that helm. Jubal Early's fought in many of the hardest engagements of the American Civil War up to that point, and Early knows he understands fast movements, which he picked up from Jackson, from Lee. Even Longstreet's a fast mover when he wants to be, and so Jubal Early is a pretty good choice for this. And one reason he chooses Jubal Early is because he needs his experienced corps commanders there around Richmond. He knows that if he gives Early a small enough force, he can cause quite a lot of damage with a smaller force. But he needs his main corps commanders there around Richmond. Early doesn't wait long. After Lynchburg, he moves up into the well, it's actually technically down the Shenandoah, but you're going north if you're going down the Shenandoah Valley. It's the way Virginia describes the Shenandoah Valley. So hopefully I won't get anybody mixed up with that.
No, I understand the way you said it. Yeah.
Early goes down the valley, which is going north up in towards Maryland, and crosses into Maryland, and is going to threaten Washington, D.C. General Lee has given him strict orders. He needs to draw as much attention from Richmond as possible. And at the moment, Washington is not that well defended. Grant has taken most of his forces with him to Richmond, and Abraham Lincoln is a little concerned. He was concerned when Grant wanted to take so many away. But Jubal Early was recognized by Union forces coming down the valley and going to be invading. So they are able to divert troops. Grant will send part of the Sixth Corps under Horatio Wright north to hopefully stall Jubal Early's advances. And we get probably one of the most pivotal battles of that campaign, which is the Battle of Monocacy, where Jubal Early will fight Lew Wallace. Lew Wallace he gets thrown in command of this kind of hodgepodge force. Parts of the Sixth Corps are coming up, but he's going to take a group of Union soldiers from around the area and attack or try to hold off Jubal Early's forces around near Frederick, Maryland. And even though it's a Confederate victory, it's actually declared the battle that saves Washington, D.C., because Lew Wallace is able to keep Jubal Early away from the capital for long enough for more Union troops to get into the capital. And
Did
so,
did he give him away, or did Jubal kind of get the slows there? Did he hesitate? Because I've read that some Union commanders say that for a few hours there, the enemy was at the gates and the city was defenseless.
I can't. Well, Washington D.C. was not defenseless. It had a lot of defenses. It was well fortified. Were there a lot of troops there? No, but as you know, being on the defensive requires you to have a lot less troops.
Right. Okay.
So I would not say in any way that Washington D.C. was defenseless in any way. There were less troops there, but even if not many reinforcements were sent to Washington D.C., I think it could have held off any kind of attack from Jubal Early, especially the size of force he had, which at that point is numbering somewhere around 15,000. Again, that's the size of a small corps in the Confederate Army, and normally we have to remember that, for example, right before the Battle of Fredericksburg, Jackson and Longstreet respectively have somewhere between 30 and 40,000 men apiece in their respective corps.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, this is actually a small corps. Eventually, when Lee will divide them up into three corps, he'll be somewhere around between 20 and 30,000. So again, it's still a small group of men that Early has commanded.
Now, this was the ambulatory force that was part of this defenses of Washington, right?
Somewhat. There's some forces like that, but there's a lot of heavy artillery that are stationed at and around Washington D.C.
Okay.
But once Monocacy is a Confederate victory, Early pushes on, and he goes all the way to Washington D.C. Right on the outskirts is where Fort Stevens is, and Abraham Lincoln will come out and wants to see a Confederate army and actually see possibly a battle take place. He wants to, witness an actual battle of this war. And him, the First Lady, and a few others go to the Fort Stevens, and Lincoln is standing up on the ramparts of the fort when it gets fired upon. There's actually a man that right next to Lincoln that gets hit. So Lincoln comes very, very close to being either wounded or killed during this Battle of Fort Stevens. Early attacks around the perimeter of Fort Stevens and around Washington D.C. But again, there's too many Union forces and they're too well entrenched. By that point in the war, Washington D.C. has some of the most intricate defenses that you'll ever find in the world, at least as far as earthworks go. So Fort Stevens is again, it's not very successful at all for Jubal Early, and more or less, it's more of probes trying to see where might be the best location to attack. Although some attacks are a little bit more uh, stronger than others, so he pulls back, and he's going to go back into northern Virginia, kind of Maryland border. Jubal Early knows that he's not going to be able to attack Washington D.C., but he can harass uh, he's going to be able to harass the Union forces from his location in the Shenandoah Valley. The Shenandoah Valley has a lot of Southern sympathizers, and they're going to be able to help Jubal Early, give a lot of food to him, help con- help sustain that Confederate army in the farthest reaches north in the Shenandoah Valley. So he'll fight a lot of small engagements, particularly particularly at Rutherford's farm, Second Kernstown, where actually one of my ancestors was killed at Second Kernstown, and it's after Kernstown that Jubal Early will launch his own reciproc, however you want to say it. Um, the Valley Campaign is one of the more destructive, at least as far as civilians go, campaigns of the entire Civil War. David Hunter, as well as Philip Sheridan, when Philip Sheridan takes over command of Union forces in the Valley, will actually launch a campaign against civilians somewhat. Is it um, more or less they will destroy crops, they will destroy houses, and many times they target high-ranking Confederate officials' houses, including the former governor of Virginia, John Letcher, and one of the cousins of Robert E. Lee, who lives in the valley. They will burn both of their houses. And Early wants to kind of fight back against that. And so after the Battle of Kernstown, kind of in retaliation, actually it was retaliation for what the Union Army was doing in the Shenandoah Valley, he sends General McCausland with a cavalry force up to Chambersburg, Maryland, and asks for um, about $500 worth of cash or about $100,000 worth of gold, or they will burn the town. The town refuses to give them that, and they will burn the town of Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. This will send a lot of Northerners become irate at it, but again, this is retaliatory. It was Northerners did it to Southerners. Southerners are now doing it to Northerners. It's recompense. They're trying to uh, kind of do a bad give and take, and it's turning into a very heated war up in Northern Virginia at this point. But Early will stay in the northern part of the Shenandoah Valley and just kind of take pot shots, do small little raids from his location, from his headquarters. But this will change when Philip Sheridan becomes commander of the Union forces in the Shenandoah Valley. There's a couple of men that Ulysses S. Grant trusts in his army. One of them is William T. Sherman, of course. The other one is Philip Sheridan. And Philip Sheridan, he will task with, and he's already gave him that task, and he's performed beautifully with the cavalry. And Early, remember that Philip Sheridan was an infantry commander for much of the war. He had fought at Stones River and at Missionary Ridge, and now he's been given cavalry command, and he's been able to fight and actually defeat and kill Jeb Stuart, which was Robert E. Lee's eyes and ears. Now Philip Sheridan is tasked with the Valley Campaign, and he will take it kind of easy during this early time of his command. This is about August of 1864. He knows the election's coming up. He doesn't want to commit a full battle because he knows that Abraham Lincoln's going to come up for re-election. If he loses a battle, then it's only going to hurt Lincoln in the election. So what he's wanting to do is fight some small battles, get some small victories, or at least keep Jubal Early where he's at. Keep him from going further north, doing things like he did at Chambersburg. And so that's what's going to result. Uh, Sheridan will actually lose, or if you want to say, like many of them come to a draw on these early stages in August of 64. But again, he's just trying to keep Early contained. The atrocity at Chambersburg was kind of the North signal that we need to that Jubal Early is actually going to be a formidable opponent at that point. And Jubal Early is doing a phenomenal job. He has distracted General Grant from Richmond. He sent many reinforcements to Washington to hopefully defend it against Early's attacks. And so his plan is working. But that will change through August. Jubal Early and Philip Sheridan will fight multiple battles. Many of them are Confederate victories, but again, it's not intended to be a major victory for the Union. They are simply trying to keep Early contained. That changes at the Battle of Third Winchester, which happens on September 19th. Battle of Third Winchester. Jubal Early has about 15,000 men. And although he is initially successful in this attack, in a kind of attack on Philip Sheridan, Philip Sheridan will rally his troops and counterattack Jubal Early's forces and wipe out nearly a third of Jubal Early's force. I mean,
Wow.
it's a destructive battle. Third Winchester is, and after Third Winchester, Philip Sheridan will be recalled. Um, it will be sorry, we got ahead of myself there. He hasn't been recalled yet. It's not until we get until Cedar Mountain, which is when Early has been given a lot more reinforcements. This is actually an exact month later. So September 19th is the Battle of Third Winchester. Exactly a month later is Cedar Creek on October 19th. It's still Philip Sheridan and Jubal Early. They've been fighting back and forth in small skirmishes, small engagements, but Cedar Creek's the next big one. Jubal Early has been given reinforcements by Robert E. Lee. He's got somewhere around 20,000 men back up at this point. So Lee is continuing to send troops. That's the problem with Lee's plan, is that yes, you're going to divert troops from Grant, but you're also diverting a lot of troops away from your own defenses at Richmond. And so Cedar Creek uh, ends in a Union victory. It's nearly the Confederates lost almost everything they gained at the Battle of Cedar Creek. They had launched a successful assault. Sheridan was able to rally his troops and push back. And uh, really, what happened was Jubal Early's force was extremely. They didn't have much food with them, and so when they defeat the Union Army in that first attack, they stop in the camps and start to take the resources that are there with them. And Sheridan's able to rally, attack Jubal Early, and drive them back. And that kind of signals the end of Jubal Early's Valley campaign. Sheridan is recalled after that back to Grant. And even though Jubal Early stays in the Valley all the way up until the next year, um, he doesn't do much simply because he doesn't have the force to do it with. He has a skeleton force that is operating in the valley, counter countering any Union forces that might try to come in, but he's not able to hold them off that well. And he will lose a significant battle in 65, and Lee will take him out of command at that point. Well, at least out of command in the valley. So that's it,
Didn't Lee,
kind of in a nutshell.
um, didn't Lee say in his when he relieved him that he relieved him because he didn't about the treatment of new troops and Early wasn't the right fit for him or something along those lines?
I'm not sure what the exact quote is, but I can't stress it enough. Jubal Early does his job,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, he didn't like the men that were under his command. I've read those letters, those commands, because again, my ancestors fought with him in the valley, and it's it's the thing about having being born and raised on the line here in what would then be two separate countries during the Civil War is I had Union ancestors that were fighting with Sherman on the way to Atlanta, and I had Confederate ancestors that were fighting up the valley with Jubal Early, and
Oh,
um, so I've read a lot of what Jubal Early thought of his troops, and he didn't think much, especially of his cavalry. You have to remember Jubal Early was accustomed to Stuart, who was really the best informative cavalier in the entire Confederate army, and possibly out of both sides. I don't know anyone that could do what he did, uh, and that's what Early was accustomed to, given lots of information that he could use to defeat the Union Army. And the Confederate cavalry in the valley with him were not that great. They were never an excellent force for him, and he wrote horrible reviews of the cavalry. He's telling Lee that he needs better, and he needs different men. Give me somebody that can perform the cavalry tasks that I need them to do. So he doesn't like his cavalry. His men are tired, they're hungry, and he is driving them pretty hard. And so his men are not on par with him a lot either. And so he's trying to perform something like Jackson did in very many ways, but the men are not capable of doing that at this point.
Yeah, that's two different times. Jackson, so his men are just give out, like I said, hungry, gaunt.
Yeah, those soldiers that were with Early in the Valley, they had fought a lot of battles, and a lot of historians will point to the Battle of Franklin, which sends the civilians and the Confederate Army kind of into a down spiral of this is over.
Yeah.
In the East, I don't know what that signal was, but I can tell it's close because Robert E. Lee is losing a lot of troops by the end of 64, like we're talking about right now. A lot of men are deserting the army. What's left are hard fighters, and they've been with them for a long time, but they're still not. There's a give out point. You can only push someone so far. So,
Yeah.
and a lot of some of these men are conscripts that have been forced into Confederate service, and they're being forced by bayonet to do this. When you're winning, it's kind of easy to stay in, but when you're losing, it's pretty easy to leave.
Right. Especially when you're hungry. That makes it all the even worse for a soldier.
Yes, and that's one thing I'll never understand is how the men of the American Civil War on both sides were able to survive on such meager foodstuffs. It just boggles my mind of how far some men can utilize those calories, which they didn't have much of, and it's a calorie deficit many of these soldiers are marching on. How you can march for 20 miles with, about 3 strips of bacon and a biscuit. I still
Yeah. I
have
was
no.
just thinking about that today too. 20 miles, every day, like I was talking about Hood when he went from, like you were talking about Franklin, let's walk from Atlanta to Franklin, Tennessee. I mean, 25, 30 miles a day, like you said, hardtack and water. I mean, I was just thinking about that.
So the Valley Campaign initially great for the Confederacy, but they're uh, trying to attack Washington D.C. and it just drained every battle that Early fought. Even if they were victories, really hurt the entire force. Him losing a third of his force in some battles, and just losing a few hundred with only around 15,000 men. When you lose 500, that's significant. That's extremely significant.
Yeah, it sounds like all these different engagements. It was a constant drain on his small force there.
Exactly, and having that small of a force be an attacking force. Could he have set up defenses somewhere and done something? Probably, but that's not what Lee needed him to do. When he he went by the book. He did what Lee told him, but by that point you're just wasting manpower. Would have been better
So,
just around Richmond maybe, but still, he was going to leave Breckinridge in the valley alone, and he would definitely have been defeated if he hadn't been reinforced by Early.
in many ways, this was a political gambit too, hoping they could get Lincoln defeated by having an army there, winning small battles.
Yeah, it is political. One thing people don't realize is every battle of the American Civil War has political connotations to it. And Jubal Early's Valley Campaign has political connotations. One reason the Confederacy tries to hold on to Atlanta for as long as they can is because this might turn the tide, and they might vote for McClellan instead of Abraham Lincoln, who may not prosecute the war like Lincoln would. Again, it's hopeful thinking, but every military action has um, political contingencies to it.
Right.
They're tied to politics continually, and so I always try to stress that to people trying to understand what the American Civil War, what these battles mean to people. They're just numbers, but these numbers actually have political ramifications.
Probably more so than any war we've ever had.
Uh, Maybe. I can definitely see the argument for it. The only one I would say not that might be more so is the American Revolution,
Sure.
simply because they were trying to form a government, but I think that's kind of, and at the same time it's kind of stretching it because would every single battle have political ramifications? Yes, but would they be to the degree that the American Civil War was? No. So I can definitely see that argument, and I do agree with you there. Probably the most political ramifications per battle than any war in American history.
Um,
Yeah,
so therein goes our story with Jubal. He goes off to what, Canada for a few years before he comes back, and
Jubal Early will. He's the well, of course, he's the lost cause
yeah, the
curator, if you want.
Sunrise Order.
But he will be the constant supporter of the Confederacy long after it's gone. Jubal Early will be the um, I forget the exact termage, but Lee calls him his bad bald man. Um,
I remember that. It
Something along those lines. I don't think that's an exact quote, but something along that.
was close to that
Yeah.
because I remember reading that. Yeah, had ball.
Uh,
Um,
Early's a pretty good division commander. He's dependable. Um, Jackson somewhat likes him as much as Jackson can like someone. Um, uh, this is kind
um,
of this is off topic a little bit, but um, I've been doing a lot of research on AP Hill because my AP Hill series is out right now,
yeah, I've
and
watched some of those. Those are very good.
yeah, everybody, people have a lot of people have problems with Jackson inside the army, but no, do you know someone that everybody likes?
Is
It
that?
seems like everybody likes Jeb Stuart.
Yeah, everybody does
Everybody
like that.
everybody's a friend. I mean, AP Hill's a friend to him, and Jackson is a friend to him. So where do you get those two that hate one another but like Jeb Stuart? Um, Robert E. Lee's almost a father figure to Stuart, and he kind of fits in with everybody. He's kind of the life of the party. But like I said, a little bit just because we got on the topic of Jackson and his picadillos and people who didn't like him, I thought I might throw in Jeb Stuart there, just because I do a lot of research on him. 'Cause
Oh, I love every Stewart story I can hear. I mean, you're right. Everybody like Jeb.
mhm. Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, even generals that were on the other side thought a lot of Jeb Stuart. One thing hadn't realized until just now, or not just now, but just recently, is Oliver Otis Howard, who prominent corps commander in the Army of the Potomac, and then moves west. They were Jeb Stuart and Howard were at West Point together,
mhm.
and they were actually really good friends. Howard said that by the time, this is the 1850s, is when early 1850s, and right when Kansas, Nebraska is having bleeding Kansas is getting ready to erupt, and sectional divide has already kind of shown itself, even in the cadets at West Point. And Howard mentions that the Southerners don't really care for him too much, and even some Northerners don't care for him too much. But one man that he says no one. He talks about the manliness of Jeb Stuart, who meets with him and actually is a good friend to him. And when Howard gets injured at West Point, it's Jeb Stuart who comes to visit him, as well as Robert E. Lee comes and visits because he's the superintendent at that point. But Howard gets injured, and Jeb Stuart checks on his friend. So the connections of the American Civil War and these generals is one reason I'm so drawn to it. Is these men knew one another and were closely, knew each other intimately. They many of them had shared bunks together at West
Right.
Point, been on the frontier together, fighting Native Americans and fighting each other once they move in the east.
Fighting
So
in
I love
Mexico.
little stories and fighting in Mexico. Um, it's a well, not Jubal, AP Hill was in Mexico. That he didn't get to see a whole lot of action, but he shows his temper. Now I'm getting into my videos now, but AP Hill has one of the worst tempers on the battlefield anyone can ever imagine. If he sees an officer that is in battle and he's being a coward, he's known to take the sword of the officer and break it over some body part, whether it's his own knee or he'll break it over he broke one sword over a man's shoulder at Antietam. It's like
Oh,
you want to, yeah, you do not be a coward around AP Hill. He will not wait for a court martial to punish you. He will actually punish you right there on the battlefield. And and the video that just dropped today, so the Cedar Mountain, he will rip the shoulder straps, so the officers rank off of a man and tell him to go forward. If he doesn't, he'll find someone to shoot him later. So, so
Oh wow.
he's a big hothead when it comes to battles. Although he seems pretty docile when it comes to just normal life, but when the battle starts, he turns on and he does not accept cowardice from anyone.
I have to watch that one tonight then.
Mhm.
So rip the man's shoulder insignia off.
Yes, he's like, you do not deserve to have it. Um,
Oh God.
but to show you, AP Hill's kind of compassionate at Antietam, there's a private who is scared. You can tell he's kind of hiding from the battle, and AP Hill will come up to him, and before he can say anything, the soldier, the young man, whispers to him, I just don't have it in me, General. I can't do it." And he whispers back, you know, "Better head to the rear. I don't want you scaring men that are much braver than you." So it's kind of it's
Huh.
somewhat compassionate, but somewhat kind of a backhanded slap. Like, just get on back there, but I understand. Get up, but just don't make anyone else leave. So he can
That's a
have
good
compassion
one.
for privates, but he did not have compassion for officers. They knew what they signed up for. I guess is what his mentality was.
Yeah, held them to a much higher standard.
He did, which I guess you should, rightfully so.
Yeah, if they're going to lead them into battle,
And then AP Hill also had an altercation with Longstreet, so he didn't like any of the corps commanders that Robert E. Lee would eventually appoint, at least over top of him. Longstreet he would actually challenge to a duel, and they actually had a duel scheduled to take place.
oh yeah, I
But
remember that now. Somehow I thought it
yeah,
was with Jackson though. I forgot it was with Longstreet. Didn't Jackson order him to be court-martialed?
oh yeah, yeah, that's an ongoing thing. They fight over that court martial forever. It seems like, and that starts with around Cedar Mountain, where Jackson thinks that AP Hill is being slow and almost incompetent because he won't get his men moving at the right time or in the right order. Which some of it was actually mismanagement on Jackson's part, but him and Jackson will up until Jackson dies, they still have a kind of a court of inquiry against one another. Or Jackson will have a court of inquiry against AP Hill, and AP Hill requests it. He's like, "I want to be proven that I did nothing wrong." So up until Jackson dies, AP Hill and him will be fighting internally.
Hmm. Yeah, I thought I remember that stuff. I didn't remember how it all unfolded, but thanks for um, um, refreshing my memory on that.
Oh, no problem.
Um, that was all I had. Do you have anything else you want to add to it, man?
Oh, I think that covers it. I think we did it really well there.
All right. We'll talk in a couple weeks and get ready to do another one.
That sounds great, buddy.
All right. Thanks, man.